And the thing is, your genes have no idea what they're doing. Saying that a gene knows, for example, when it is going to regulate cell biology, saying that a gene knows what it's doing is like saying that a cake recipe knows when you're going to make the cake or decides when you are going to make the cake. Genes don't regulate themselves. What regulates genes? Environment does. Environment can be very local. The local environment in a cell, it's running out of energy, and that turns on a gene which makes more of a glucose transporter protein, and the cell takes up more energy. Change in environment alters gene activity, and you fix the problem. Or environment could be on the level of the whole body, high levels of testosterone, and as a result, in this muscle cell, certain genes are turned on, and the muscle cell grows bigger. You put on muscle mass. Or environment could be environment in the conventional sense. You've just given birth, you smell your baby, and as a result, genes are turned on and you start making oxytocin. Oh my God, genes run all of life. They're the same. You smell your baby's tush, and as a result, you change gene transcription. Genes don't really know what they're doing. Genes are being regulated by environment. And the critical thing is, different environments regulate the same genes in different ways. Do not dream of writing down any of this, but what we have here are a whole bunch of genes that have effects on behavior only in certain environments. For our purpose, the most interesting one in red there, a gene called MAO alpha, monoamine oxidase alpha. It's got something to do with this neurotransmitter, serotonin. All that matters is it comes in two different flavors, and by all logic, one of those flavors should set you up for higher levels of aggression. And a huge study was done some years ago following 17,000 kids for decades, and the answer comes back, if you've got the wrong version of this gene, you are indeed, as a young adult, more likely to already have a history of antisocial violent behavior. If and only if you were abused as a child. If you weren't raised with abuse, zero effect whatsoever. In other words, it's not what the gene is, it's not what the environment is, but the interaction between the two. In other words, genes decide nothing. Instead, they're being regulated by environment sufficiently so that it never makes sense to ask what a gene does or an environment does, only in a particular context of interaction. Okay, that's great. So that tells us something about why genes in a penguin may work differently in the middle of the Sahara or something. But yeah, you're not going to see penguins there, but you're going to see humans there, and in Antarctica, and in tundra, and in rainforest, and polygamous societies, and monogamous, and capitalist, and socialist. There's no species on Earth that lives in more different environments. Thus, by definition, there's no species on Earth that is freer of genetic determination than we are. Okay, so now we're back to fertilized egg. That's the end of us. But amazingly, we got to push further back, because to make sense of all of this, we now have to ask, what were your ancestors doing? What sort of cultures were they inventing? Because that's going to influence how you are going to turn into that adult that you are. What sort of cultures did they invent? Turns out to be very sensitive to what sort of ecosystems they lived in. For example, across the world, desert dwellers are statistically more likely than chance to invent monotheistic religions. Rainforest dwellers invent polytheistic ones, and all sorts of baggage that goes along with that. Another pattern, when you look at humans living in small hunter-gatherer bands, the religions they invent involve almost all the time involve gods who could care less what humans are doing. It's not until humans are living in sufficiently high density that you're interacting with strangers, that you interact anonymously, then humans start inventing what are called moralizing gods. Gods who are watching us, and gods who are judging us, and gods who are the pair of eyes up there on the bus stop there when we're getting complex enough that we can't do it ourselves. Or another critical distinction has to do with traditional ways of making a livelihood. In the traditional world, people are either top left, hunter-gatherers, top right, agriculturalists or horticulturalists, or in the center, pastoralists. Pastoralists, people wandering the grasslands or the deserts with their herds of camels and cows and goats and all of that. And there's a particular vulnerability if you're a pastoralist. If you're a rainforest hunter-gatherer, bad people cannot come at night and steal your rainforest. If you're an agriculturist, they can't come at night and steal 20 acres of your maize. But if you're a pastoralist, people could come at night and steal your herds, rustle your herds there, and everywhere around the world, pastoralists come up with cultures of honor, built around violent retribution, warrior classes, honor killings, vendettas that stretch for centuries. And what is most remarkable is, within minutes of birth, if you were a child in a culture of honor, your mother is speaking to you at a higher volume and holding you for a shorter length of time than if you were a child in one of these other cultures. If you were born into a collectivist culture, on the average, your mother is nursing you for longer lengths of time in your first week of life than if you were born in an individualist culture. In other words, within minutes of birth, everything we've already seen is now being shaped by what your ancestors were doing for a living centuries before. In other words, ecosystems shape cultures, shape brains, shape behaviors. And some of these differences are manifest within minutes of birth. In other words, brains and bodies and behaviors and cultures and genes all co-evolve.